Hello, everyone, and welcome to this another look at 2D twin stick top down shooter. My name is Kasanas. Guys, in this episode, we're going to take a quick look at Unity's input systems. There's two of them. We're going to take a brief look at both and then concentrate on the new input system. All right, let's get started. Okay, guys, let's start off here by just looking at and comparing the new and the old input system. We'll take a look at them both very briefly, and then we'll concentrate on the new input system, and we'll concentrate on a really simplistic way of using it. Unity set up a really simple way for us to get started with it, and that's what we're gonna really look at in this particular episode. If you want to see the old input system, and I don't know why they call it that, it's still the default input system. It automatically is available when you start up a new project. If you want to take a look at the old input system, you can go to Edit, you can go down to your project settings, and when the project settings tab opens up here, the window opens up here, you're going to be looking for the input manager. And what we see here is with the old system, if I open this up, if the old system works on this idea of something called the axes, and axes are basically strings, if I open up one of them here, basically strings that you can monitor through functions within code. You can monitor these particular inputs for a change in value. And the change in value will be based on a particular negative and positive buttons and alternative negative and positive buttons that are going to provide input to your system. In this particular case, looking at the horizontal axes, if I use the left and the right arrow keys, I'm getting the negative and the positive values. If I'm using the alternative, negative and positive, that's the A and the D keys. Basically, if those keys are not pressed, then the horizontal axes will have a value of 0. If the positive button is pressed, it will have a value of greater than 0 up to a maximum of 1. If the negative button is pressed, then it will have a negative value between greater than, or excuse me, less than 0 to a value of negative 1. And we can read those values and then utilize them in their code. And a lot of the things work in the same manner. Some of them will have, so let's take a look, for example, at fire. So in the case of fire, we only have a positive button and we only have an alternative positive button. You will set up these axes and you can do so very simply. It's working on this array size right here, simply by adding in an additional value to the array. So if I change this value to 31, I will have an additional input within the input manager, which I can then name and utilize that string in code to identify the axes I'm looking at. It's relatively simplistic, and there are a ton of videos, including videos on my channel, that go over the use of the old input system. It's a good system. It's relatively easy to use. It's relatively easy to set up. The only real problem with the old input system is it's not very flexible. That's the really big issue with the old input system. The new input system does away with the idea of axes. We no longer utilize those strings. Instead, we use something called an input action map. To create an input action map, to do it manually, you're going to right click anywhere within your project tab. You're going to go to create and you're going to head on down to input actions. And when you do, it's going to create this item. And I'll just call it test AI for now. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to delete it anyway. If we take a look at test AI, if I double click on it, it's going to open up this new tab. And I'm just going to park this tab right here so we can see it. The this new window, this new tab now makes available something called the action maps. And the action maps themselves are consistent of action maps, actions, and let me just take a look here if I create a new one. Action maps, actions, and then the action properties themselves. The interesting thing about the new input system, you're going to go through and you're going to give this action map a name, and that's going to host all of the actions associated with a particular action map. So for example, I could create an action map called player, and then all of my actions, any of the input I have associated with my player will be recorded within actions. And again, we will go through and we will give our actions a particular name. We might call it fire, we might call it jump, etc., etc. Later on, we're going to then associate these actions with particular properties. In this particular case, we can see this action is a button type. There are a number of different types that you can have here. The really great thing about this new input system, it's much more complicated to set up. It honestly is. It's more complicated to set up. It takes longer to set up properly. But the really great thing about it is extremely flexible. It's extremely flexible, allowing us to associate all different types of input with a particular action. So I could set my actions up to be using keyboard, to be using joystick, to be using console controllers, anything that I want. I can actually set up right here, and it's going to handle all of that for me. So once you've got your action map set up and once you have all of your actions in place, the new input system is pretty powerful and it's very, very flexible. So you have to kind of decide when you're choosing which one you want to go with, either the new input system or the old input system, which one you want to use and why you want to use it. There's not one that's right and one that's wrong. In fact, like I've said, the new input system is not default. You have to go in, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. You have to go in and you have to actually install the new input system to even be able to use it in the first place. So let's, I'm going to delete this for now, and let me just click on it and hit my delete button. And yeah, I'm sure. Goodbye. Yes, delete it. Okay. So with that gone, we're going to take a look at a very, very simplistic way that Unity has allowed us to set up controls and our action maps for the most commonly used actions. Okay, so if right now you've been trying to follow along and you've noticed that you actually don't have if by right clicking and saying create didn't have the input actions, that's because we have to set up the new input system. The old input system is by default in place and ready to be used. The new input system has to be installed. So let's take a look at what you're going to have to do in order to be able to follow along. You can go to Window, you can click on Package Manager, and just like any other package, you're going to have to look for the input system. If you've installed packages before, it works identically. First of all, you're going to want to make sure that you're in Unity Registry. I think by default it comes in like this in your project. You're going to want to switch over to Unity Registry. You're going to want to scrub down until you find Input System, and you're going to want to click on it. When you do, in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see the ability to install the new input system. So you're going to click the install button and it's going to go through its complete process. Once it's done, it's going to ask you to restart. That's one of the differences between the new input system and other packages. You have to actually restart your system in order to be able to have it work properly. Once you've restarted, you will have the ability to create your input, whoops, and your input actions. Now, let me just close this off because we're not going to need it again. I've already done that. You guys should take a second and go through that right now. Something else you might want to consider doing is with this particular project, I'm going to be using some basic sprites here that I've created. They're just really simple circles and arrows and triangles and things like that that I use for almost all of my projects. I have something like this so that I can use it as placeholder data. I can use it as placeholder assets for anything that I want to create really quickly. And in this particular series, we're not going to be going through and building all the fancy animation and that kind of stuff that you actually saw in the initial intro video. We're not going to be doing that. We're concentrating here on how to actually build this particular game. Okay, so let's close this off. Once we have the input in place, the ability to create our input in place, our action maps in place, we have to actually do that in order to create a movement and create, any kind of mechanics file that we want to create. We'll have to go through that input. Anything that requires input is going to require an action within the action map. And that can be a little bit daunting and it can take a little while. The really great thing is that Unity has set up for us a particular component that takes into account a lot of the basic stuff, a lot of the really common used stuff. So we'll take a look at that. It's an easy way to get started. To start using the component, we're going to have something we can add the component to. So I'm going to go into those sprites I told you about. So let me go to sprites here. Let me go to my basic input and let me drag a circle in place here. And I'll just use this as a holder for. This will become my character later on. But for now, we'll just leave it as circle and we'll explore the idea of the new input system. So as of right now, I have connected to my computer. I have an Xbox controller. You don't have to have an Xbox controller. In fact, the great thing about the new input system is you can pretty much have any controller you want or any type of input you want. So I'm going to go through some ideas right now, and you guys can follow along with whatever you have available. If all you have available is your keyboard and mouse, that's perfectly fine. You'll still be able to utilize that to go through and explore the ideas that we're exploring right now. Okay, so as I've already mentioned to you, Unity has set up for us a really easy method of getting started with a new input system, particularly when we're talking about a lot of the default ideas that we utilize on almost every project. It's a component, and that new component is called the player input. So I'm going to start searching here for player. Once I see player input, I'm going to use that. Don't use the player input manager. We'll talk about that later on in the series for sure. But for now, we're just going to take a look at the player input. And when I add the player input to my screen, to this particular hierarchy, you can see that I've got a number of different things that need to be set up before I can actually go through and create the action maps that are required, or to actually create the functionality that I want in this particular player. Right now, I have no input action. There's no input action asset at all. That was the thing I created earlier when I went down here and I right-clicked and I said create and I said input actions. That's what it's asking for right now. So instead of having to do it manually, you can simply click on this button right here, create actions, and when you do, it's going to ask you, well, what do you want to call it? Why don't we call this one here? I'm going to be using this throughout this series. Why don't I call it? I'll just call it this. It's a terrible name. Studio Practicum 1 underscore weekly. I'm actually doing this series for a course that I'm teaching. It's called Studio Practicum 1. But it's a terrible name. Don't give it that name, right? Give it a name that you're going to be able to identify later on, something that you think is important later on. And I'm just going to save it right here in the very top under my assets. So I'm going to save it like that. It's an awful name. Now, if we take a look, what this has done for us, it's opened up that window that I showed you earlier, and it's already filled in a ton of details here. So let me drag this, and I'm just going to park it up here so we can take a look. The action maps, it's defined two action maps, and you can have as many action maps as you desire. In this particular case, we have a player action map that has right now move, look, and fire associated with it. Each of these are actions. We also have the UI action map, and the UI action map has a number of different things associated with it. So these are all common things that we will use in pretty much every game. You'll have a reason why you're going to push these buttons in almost every single game. If we take a look over here at the player input now, we can see that a number of things have been filled in. Or there's some things that are still missing, but we're not going to worry about those things right now. But there is something that's been filled in, and that's down here where it says behavior. And under behavior, we have several different options. There are four options under behavior here. Send message, broadcast messages, invoke Unity events, and invoke C# events. So with the new input system, with this particular component, we can either use messages, either send message or broadcast message to speak to whatever it's attached to. In this particular case, it's attached to the circle. If we decide to use send messages, it'll communicate to any of the scripts that are located on the same hierarchy level as this particular input manager, the player input. If we use broadcast, it'll talk to everything below in the hierarchy. And if we use either of the event systems, it'll run based on events. Now, there's probably a one that you prefer. I'm going to stick with the idea of send messages. Send messages is something that we've covered in the classes that I'm teaching, both send messages and broadcast messages. We've already kind of covered those ideas in class. So I'm going to stick with send message for now. I think that comes in as default anyway. I'm going to leave it at send message. So that means that any script that I want to communicate with is going to need to be in the same hierarchical layer as this player input component. If it's not, the communication won't occur. Okay, so let's take a look at what we actually got then inside of these action maps. Under player, I've got move, I've got lock, and I've got fire. Let's take a look at fire for now. Well, I just chose this one randomly. In fact, maybe we'll use this one here when we're moving forward. The fire is already associated with a number of things. It's associated with the right trigger on any gamepad. It's associated with the left mouse button. It's a primary touch tap on the touch screen. It's got a trigger on the joystick or a primary action on an XR controller. What this has done by creating this particular action, and Unity's created this for us, by having this particular action, all of these inputs are acceptable. They will all do something. They will all act as a button in some way. So if I go back here to fire itself, it says it's acting as a button. If I click on the actual input system, it'll tell me exactly how it's working. So right now it's associated with a gamepad. If I click on each of these, it's associated with the mouse and so on and so on and so on. So this has taken out a lot of the work for us. Now, obviously, we're not just simply going to use this. We're going to want to go in later on, and we're going to want to add on our own. But for now, let's just explore the options and how we'll utilize the functionality that's associated with this system. Okay, so in order to be able to capture the input as it's given to our circle, we're going to require a script that has a public function available. It's going to work like any other send message. If you've used send message before, you're going to have to create a function, a public function that captures this input. It's actually relatively simple to do. So let's scrub down here and let's say add component. Let's add in a new script. We'll call it our circle controller, I guess. It's fine. And we'll create and add that. And I'm going to, as soon as it's done here, I'm just going to drag it right over into my scripts so I don't get too messy too quickly. Over here in scripts, and I'll double click to open it up. Okay. I've got this at 150%, so hopefully everyone can see it out there. This is obviously the default script I've created. There's nothing in here yet at all. A couple things we have to do immediately. If we want to use the new input system, we're going to have to add in our using Unity engine dot input system. Great. Once we've added this in, the library is available. We'll have access to whatever we need to from that particular library. Now, we know how send message works, or broadcast message, whichever one you decided to use. We know how it works. It's going to be looking for a public function within this script, and it's going to call that particular function. In fact, it'll call all the scripts you have on here. It'll call that function on all of those scripts that are available. So let's go in here right away, and we're going to make sure that we've created ourselves a public function. Now, what we have to do, and it's a public void in this particular case. It doesn't have to be, but in this particular case, we're just gonna use this function to change the color of our circle. That's all it's gonna do. It's just so you guys can see how it's working. So we're gonna start off with our public void in this particular case, and what you have to do is you have to use on is the next keyword you're going to use on, and then you're going to give it the action name. So in this particular case, our action is the fire. If we go back here and take a look at our actions, our action here is fire. So on fire, it's going to do this for any of this. On fire, we want something to happen. Now, the on fire can have something that comes in. On fire will always take an input value. You don't necessarily have to use the input value, and you can call it anything you want. So, oops, I didn't call it anything at all there. I'll just call it input value. Well, it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's going to be available to you in your function later on to use, and we'll explore using that at a later time. So this is the basic form that your function is going to take. Public, void or not void, whatever the return type is, on, and then the action itself, and then you're going to allow it to have an input of an input value. In our particular case, we're not going to use that input value. Instead, all we're going to do is we're going to change the color of our circle. Let's go back really quickly. Let me just move this out of the way for a second. Let's go back and take a look at our circle. In our scene, let's take a look at our circle. And to change the color, we're just going to grab the color from here from the sprite renderer. We're going to grab the color and we're going to change it to, we'll change it to red. We'll change the default red color value that's available within Unity. So down here in on fire, I'm going to say get component because we know that it's located in the same location as everything else right now. There's only one hierarchy level within our circle. So get component, and we're going to be looking for our sprite renderer. Our sprite, oops, I spelled it wrong. Sprite renderer. I don't know why I'm clicking all the way down. We're looking for our sprite renderer, and in turn, we're going to want to change the color. So we'll grab the color itself, and all we'll do is we'll just set our color equal to red. This is perfect. Set our color equal to red. Okay, I'm going to save this. Now, Unity has set this up, so that's how easy this is for us. Unity has set this up for us, so that's how easy it is to start utilizing the new input system, utilizing the player input. I don't know why you wouldn't use it. I mean, you can set up your own action map, but if you're adding this to the player, I almost always use the player input immediately, that component. I don't know if there's maybe something as far as processing is concerned, as far as optimization is concerned, why you wouldn't want to use it, but I almost always use it. Okay, so this has been saved. Let's move this thing out of the way, and what we're going to be able to do now is simply run this and click on the button. So let me just get my controller, and I've got my controller in my hand right now. I'm using Xbox controllers I've already mentioned. If we take a look at the right here, my right trigger on my gamepad, that's any gamepad. So on my Xbox, I can use my right trigger in order to be able to click on it. So if I click after I've pressed play, here we are in play mode, and I'm going to click the trigger. And you can see that it has gone through and accessed and changed the color of our sprite. That's how easy it is to get started with the new input controller. Now, what we're going to look at next is we're going to explore the idea of creating our own actions. So we can make it red. Why don't we do exactly the same thing and just make it blue? All right, so we're going to set up a new action that will change this to blue. It doesn't really matter what we're doing right now. All we're doing is checking to make sure that you understand how to create new actions. I'm going to go back here to my action map, and under player, I'm going to go with player selected. I'm going to go over here to the actions and I'm going to click the plus sign. And when I do, it's going to set up this brand new action for me. And let's give it a better name. Let's call it make blue. That's at least a little bit better. What you're going to want to do, I'm going to leave it as button for now. That's perfectly fine. You can see here that there's nothing bound to it. There's no binding at all. That means that there's nothing actually allowing for input here. I'm going to click on this. And when I do, it opens up this new binding properties. We took a look at this previously. What we didn't take a look at is the option to set up these new binds. If I click on here, we have a couple of options. We can go through and we can manually choose. So I can say gamepad and I can suggest what kind of gamepad it is. It's actually appearing underneath there, which is terrible. This is a little bit broken. It's always, I don't know if it's a graphical error on my computer. Hopefully it's not happening on yours. What I like to do, there is this listen. This button right here says, I believe it says listen. If I remember correctly, it says listen. I can't see it anymore. But on yours, if it says listen, great. It's if yours looks like mine, I'm sorry for you. But right here, if I go right above usage, there's a button here, and you can kind of see it lighting up. If I click that button, it now says it's listening. I'm going to pick up my controller, and I'm going to choose the A button for now on my Xbox controller. If I press the A button, it automatically says to you, okay, well, here's the options that you have as far as that button you've just pressed is concerned. I can either associate it directly with an Xbox controller, so that means I'm expecting this to only work with an Xbox controller, or I can set it up for a generic gamepad, and it's going to map whatever the south button is on whatever game controller you've plugged in. It's going to map the south button to this particular event. I'm going to choose that for now. So I'm going to leave it like this as a south gamepad. As a south button. That means that anything I plug in here should work. Theoretically, anything I plug in here should work. Now, with that done, you can see that I've created myself this brand new action that has a button associated with it. I could go through and I could add keyboard and everything else in exactly the same way by going in, adding a new, by hitting this plus sign right here, adding a brand new binding and adding as many as I wish. I can also associate each of these with a particular scheme. And if we took a look up here at the fire under gamepad, it's already listed as gamepad. You can go through and do the same thing. So this is telling it this is the gamepad scheme. We'll take a look at changing schemes later on. And we're not going to worry about it for now. But I've got this brand new input action that's available to me. I'm going to go through the exact same steps. So let me once again, grab this guy, drag it over. And with that done, I'm just gonna copy this. So let me just grab this, Control C, boom, boom, Control V. There we go. And instead of on fire this time, I called it make blue. Maybe I should have called it a shorter name because I'm pretty lazy, but I'll type the whole thing. Make blue. All right, exactly the same thing on make blue. We're going to use our input value. We're not going to actually use it this time, but it's available to us. And instead of changing it to red, we're going to change it to blue, spelled appropriately, to blue like that. And then I'm going to file save this. Now, that's it. Once I've done this, I have defined my new action type. I can go into something I almost forgot, and I just noticed this little star right here. What's very, very important is that you either save this manually or you click on your autosave. I just leave autosave on. I'm not really sure. Some people maybe want to have that complete control. They need that control, and they don't have autosave on. I leave autosave on. Any changes I make are automatically preserved in that way. So with autosave on, I'm going to go back to my scene right here. I'm going to hit play. I'm going to pick up my controller. And if I click on my right, I turn red. If I click on my A button, I turn blue. If I click on my trigger, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. So that input is automatically working. It's working exactly as we expect it to, which is awesome. There's only one more thing that I want to look at in today's video, and let's just go back here to our action map. You'll note that we had both player and UI functionality associated with this particular action map. The player stuff we're setting up right now on the circle. The UI itself is going to allow us to control our UI through whatever means we wish. And once again, if we open up any of these, like navigation, for example, we can see we have D-pad in the gamepad, etc., etc., etc. So just like we had with the player, we have actions. Those actions are associated with particular bindings. Those bindings will operate in a particular way. Awesome. What we want to do is make sure that our UI is actually set up to utilize that event system or that particular system. Okay, so here's the easiest way to do it. I know it's probably not the best way, but here's the easiest way. I'm just going to go to my UI right now, and I'm going to create myself a brand new canvas. And as soon as I create this canvas, you can see that I've also created this event system. And right now, if I click on the event system, uh-oh, we got ourselves a warning. It says here, you are using standalone input module. So we're actually utilizing input that is replacing the old way of doing things. And if we want to set it up that way, we can simply say replace input system with the new one. So the UI input module, which is the one that we saw over here. If we click on this, just by clicking on it, it's automatically going to set up everything for us. So right now, if we take a look at this UI point as an example, we come in here, we will find UI point. So it's associated the UI action map with all of these different events. Now your canvas, any of your buttons, any of your movement through your UI will all utilize these action maps as well. So with this simple system that Unity has given us, with this simple component being added into our game, we are now able to utilize the new input system. A lot of the stuff that we have to set up manually normally is done for us. All right. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that. That is all I really wanted to show you today. I really hope that you guys enjoyed that. We are going to be moving on in the next video to things like movement. So we'll start to understand exactly how to create movement in our player. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down in the comments. Give me a thumbs up. I haven't done this in a very long time. This was probably a terrible video. But it's been a really long time. It's been a number of years. I'm moving into stuff now that I think is important that my students, I'm teaching and the coordinator at Centennial College in Toronto, Ontario. I think it's very important, some of the stuff that my students get, and I'd like to give them access to multiple versions of learning. So not only through lecture, but also through things like this, these type of videos that they can watch over and over and over again. I am not covering the same things that I'm covering in class. I cover a lot more in class. Just very particular aspects of the course are going to be covered here. If you guys want to know more about Centennial College, please let me know. Write down in the comments, let me know, tell me about yourselves, tell me about the game you're creating. I love to hear from people. Like I said, it's been a while since I've done this, so hopefully it turned out okay. All right, everyone? All right, how did I used to do this? I used to say thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Yeah, I think that's what I used to say. Thanks, everyone.